And now, live from England, bringing you news and analysis that you won't find on the corporate and government mainstream media. It's the WideShut Webcast.
Good evening, Resistors. Today is October 10th, 2011. I'm your host, Keelan Balderson, on the Resistance Radio Network. That's wideshut.co.uk for all of my articles and videos, and for everything else, it's resistradio.com. We've got a very special guest coming up later on tonight. We have a Mr. Ian Puddick joining us of policeexpenses.co.uk. Some of you will know him from various alternative media. His story did eventually break into the mainstream. I've covered it on and off on WideShut. Been trying to get him on for some time now, because basically his story is a perfect example of how the elite, people in positions of power, you know, the extent they will go to try and prevent free speech, and how there's one rule for them and another rule for the average person. I mean, the harassment this guy has suffered is very worrying to me, I'll put it that way. And I'll be bringing Ian on shortly. But I just wanted to have a quick word about the upcoming Occupy the City protest. For those that don't know, basically the Occupy Wall Street movement has caught on over here, and starting this Saturday, the 15th, people are going to start, quote, occupying the City of London and the London Stock Exchange. I don't know the people behind this. I'm not sure whether it's just spontaneous grassroots or whether there is some kind of seasoned protesting veterans kind of setting this whole thing up. I'm not too sure. But there's bound to be people with differing worldviews and differing solutions to the mess that we found ourselves in. From what I've read online, on the Facebook page for this group, you know, it all seems fairly above board. People are genuinely upset that the banks were bailed out at our expense for the mistakes and crimes that they committed. People are upset about the austerity, all these cuts we've got to face, because the government ridiculously overspent for years in our names and is in debt to the bankers. Now, not everyone is going to understand the full details of how these things work, you know, how the bond markets work, the fractional reserve banking system, quantitative easing, all this stuff you can throw around. Not everyone's going to fully understand that, but that gives us the opportunity to educate them, to get to know these people, to find other like-minded people that do get it. And just because, you know, there may be Socialist Workers' Party members there, or Black Bloc anarchists giving themselves a bad name because the public don't really know why they're smashing things up. Just because there may be these other groups, it doesn't mean the whole idea has been co-opted. And it certainly doesn't mean that we should turn around and come home again because others don't agree with us or have a different opinion on how to solve the mess we're in. You know, I've been looking on YouTube with this whole Occupy Wall Street thing, and there's a lot of, quote, conspiracy porn out there. People itching to say that it's all staged and co-opted. The reason that I don't think it's co-opted is because I can clearly see the mainstream media trying to co-opt it. They were silent to start with. They wouldn't touch it. Now they're trying to spin it into the usual left-right paradigm. Headlines out today: Occupy Wall Street is young liberals' response to Tea Party. Is it? Really? The Occupy movement should follow the Tea Party playbook. Should it? You know, they're trying to make the Occupy movement the fake left wing to the fake Tea Party right wing. But on the ground, I don't think it's like that. It's people from all different backgrounds, all different beliefs, that do understand that something's very wrong with the system. and the establishment are desperate to spin this in the way they want to, but it tells me that they're not in control and we can make a difference. So the Resistance Radio crew are going to be there in London for the Saturday at least, depending on how things develop. I mean, I'll be up for staying overnight or two. It just sort of depends on the numbers, the police tactics, because I mean, you never really can tell how these things are going to go. But we'll definitely be there on the Saturday. We did plan to stream the protest live. You know, we've talked about it a bit, but I think that might prove to be more trouble than it's actually worth. I mean, there's going to be plenty of video. We're all going to have cameras and stuff that we'll be able to upload things later on in the day. We could call into ABC show and do a sort of special protest show, or perhaps Mr. Britt can do a show because he's unfortunately still stuck in the Netherlands. But yeah, the info will get out there if we don't manage to stream it live. I mean, it's not just going to be us there. Obviously, there'll probably be other people doing the live thing or keeping everyone updated on Twitter and things like that. Now, one criticism of this whole Occupy movement is that they're being very vague. They don't have a list of demands, or at least that's what they're trying to present it as. They don't really know what they're doing. They're just kind of walking around saying kill rich people or something. But people are beginning to understand that the bankers and the mega corporations working through the arm of government are screwing us all over. They may not understand the system entirely, as I say, but it's hard to articulate. It is. But at least we're getting to that point where people are talking about it. You know, they say they haven't got a list of demands. Well, I think everyone can agree that the system's screwed. Instead of the media saying, oh, well, they've not got any points to talk about. Well, maybe it's the media's job to actually start talking about it. You know? I've got a quick list here of a few of the things that I would personally do. And, you know, these are some of the things that came into my head today. I'm not saying they're 100% perfect and that we could implement these overnight, but it's the process of meeting people with like minds and just discussing this kind of thing. So this is what I would do. I would request a full breakdown of the national debt and who it's owed to. Right now we don't even keep adequate records of who's holding our debt. But we need to look at where, you know, who owns this debt, who owns us, and where the money's been used to fund illegal wars, or to fund the unelected European Union, or to pay for the banker bailout. How about we make it the sole liability of those that instigated all of that? So, for example, Tony Blair and the politicians that supported him would then have to be responsible for the cost of the Iraq war. If we could follow we might not even be able to follow the numbers, but if we could follow the numbers and find that out, then make them responsible for that, because none of us voted for it. And I know it's not likely that they'll pay it back anytime soon. Blair is a rich man, but the Iraq war costs a lot of money as well. So maybe we put Tony Blair through some austerity cuts until he can pay back his war. And for everything else, I say we freeze the interest on the debt. And any banks and financial institutions that can survive without being paid back, well then, let's not pay them. It's their own fault for lending to a bankrupt country. Number 2, end the private financial system's monopoly over money creation. You know, right now, the only people that are allowed to create new money are the private bankers, the private for-profit bankers. They do it through loans and credit cards and mortgages. And when the government wants to borrow money, they do it through government bonds and things like that. And then we need to discuss creating a truly publicly owned bank that can issue debt-free currency. You know, that's one idea that gets thrown around. We could also think about pegging the currency to a gold standard or some other form of backing. You know, there's lots of things we could be talking about. reinstating. Well, they don't call it that over here, I don't think, but Glass-Steagall, which is like a ring fencing where the gamblers that want to gamble with fictitious money, fine, do it, but not within the same structure as the banks with people's deposits. So you separate those two. Increase the reserves banks have to hold. There's all these things. We've talked about them a few times on here, and I'm sure we'll get to it again. I'll do a show after the protest, obviously, but I'm rambling now. I think it's time we should go to our guest. I'll just see him on the Skype here. Hello, Ian. Can you hear me?
Hello. Yeah, loud and clear, mate.
Thanks for coming on the show tonight.
Delighted.
Let's start from the beginning. Let's make this easier.
Sure.
You're Ian Puddick, the owner of a plumbing business. You may as well be Joe Blogs, somebody's next door neighbour, and
Sure.
you discover that your wife is having an affair.
Yep.
So talk us through the initial stages of how this story kind of progressed.
Yeah, I mean, let's put it into some kind of perspective as well. What you just mentioned, these things happen. Obviously, they're very, very upsetting and very distressing. But living in the real world, it's just a fact of life. These things happen. When I initially found out, I was obviously very distressed and upset, and decided that we would try and resolve things and try and just work things out in the best way possible. And in the first instance, that meant confronting the other person,
Right.
which I called. Am I okay? Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, carry on. Yeah, loud and clear.
Yeah, I rang the gentleman up, explained that I was aware of what was going on, and I'd like my wife moved so that we could try and sort our lives out, if that makes sense. The chap concerned was the managing director, a board member of the world's largest reinsurance company called Guy Carpenter Limited.
Yeah.
They insure the insurance companies. That's what they do. So we're talking about the highest level of investment banking, really, sharing that risk. The guy told me it was none of my business and told me where to go. So I rang the chairman up, explained the circumstances to him. He was absolutely fantastic. A guy called Nick Franklin. He was very, very nice. And he moved my wife so that we could try and resolve this very, very messy situation.
So when was the first kind of when was your first arrest, or when did you first start getting harassed? I mean, in what kind of order did that go?
I've sort of given you that just a bit of background to sort of give you an idea of where this is. I mean, this is an everyday occurrence, I guess, hopefully for not too many people, but it does go on. The gentleman concerned was able to use a company called Kroll, and this is where it all gets a bit sinister.
Right, yeah.
The gentleman concerned said that there was no affair, and I'd made it all up to discredit him, and it was very embarrassing for him. They reported the incident to Sussex Police, and Sussex Police confirmed in writing that it was a civil matter and not a criminal matter. So that wasn't much help for him. So they Kroll, and this is actually the Kroll. This has got nothing to do with the other gentleman concerned. Kroll confirmed in emails that not to worry about Sussex Police. Their head of security, a guy called Dan Mead, he's ex-City of London Police. He had friends or contacts at City of London Police whom he was going to meet. The guy at Kroll, Dan Mead, then went on to meet Detective Chief Inspector Chandler and Detective Superintendent Davis. And after a 4-hour meeting, and this was everything I'm saying now is disclosed in court. We got emails to prove and back up what I'm going to say. So this isn't conspiracy. Dan Mead pulled in a favour with these two very senior officers at City of London Police. They authorised Operation Bohan. They worked in partnership with Kroll. That was something separate. That was called Operation Martin. We're still not sure who paid for Kroll. We're not sure if it was City of London Police, and also how much City of London Police paid Kroll, a private security company.
So was it the company that was that's got these contacts with Kroll, and they kind of set this this thing rolling, or was it actually the board member that was using his contacts to?
That's a shady area, and obviously it's still under investigation. But it's an amalgam of the company and the board member himself. But It was actually Kroll who was able to manipulate or pull in the favours with City of London Police. It had nothing to do with this board member.
And for those that don't know, Kroll is kind of known as the CIA of Wall Street, almost like a secret service of, well, it's a private firm really, which in itself is a little bit odd to even think that this kind of company exists, but that's kind of what they do.
Company. They're a global company. Very dark organisation. When I was talking to the journalists earlier on in my case, they were warning me about Kroll and said some very, very scary things. But I just decided that, I hadn't done anything wrong. There's clearly an abuse of power here. I think if anyone that's seen my website, which is policeexpenses.co.uk, which diverts to ianpuddick.com, at the end of my video, I said that if my wife had had an affair with a milkman and I phoned the dairy,
right,
would this have happened? And we all know the answer to that.
No, it wouldn't. So
of course not. Of course not.
So when did you personally start to realise that there was some shifty characters kind of investigating you?
Well, I got a call. I got a call from in the first instance, my wife was interviewed by City of London Police, and the officer that interviewed my wife suggested that there was no affair and that I'd made it up. And my wife told the truth. She said there had been an affair, and in spite of that, the city police still didn't believe there was an affair. And there was a statement somewhere along the line to the effect that I had made up the affair, my wife had invented the affair just to get to this guy. Which I have to say, imagine that we had invented all this nonsense. What the hell are the counter-terrorist police doing, getting involved in all this crap? I mean,
and what really would be your motive in the first place to make it all up?
But imagine I'm completely nuts. We're nuts. We're all nuts. We made it all up. Why are the terrorist police involved in all this nonsense? That's a more important and a more relevant question. They're meant to be out keeping us safe, and they're getting involved in an affair. I mean, it's just nuts. Absolutely nuts.
It is. So, what sort of things were they doing? I mean, you've told me they sort of raided offices and.
Well, you asked me, at what point did I know something sort of more sinister was sort of happening? My wife had been interviewed by City of London Police. Just after that, I then got a phone call. I got several threatening phone calls at that time. Anonymous, didn't have a clue who they were. One of them that stood out at the time, I didn't obviously have a clue who it was. I had a call saying, are you in Puddick? And yes, mate, very posh voice, not threatening, not like we're going to beat you up, you're dead, we're going to duff you, nothing like that at all. Just mate, you've got no idea who you're effing with. We've got deep pockets and we're going to F you like you've never been effed before. Now, I had some rather sinister calls before that, but this just, obviously is clearly a threat. It was one of many, didn't have a clue who it was. Just after I had that call, I was subsequently, my home was raided by City of London Counter-Terrorism Directorate. My office was, as you know, I'm a plumber, I run a plumbing company. That was raided by the Counter-Terrorism Directorate. Wow. And subsequently, my company accountants, who have got jack diddly to do with the affair or anything, however far you stretch the whole thing, my accountants clearly have nothing to do with this. They were subsequently raided as well. In Operation Bohan.
How did that whole process go down then? I mean, did you get a knock at the door and did they feel who they were and went along with it, or was this just like black men running in? It
was a knock at the door. It was all timed because my wife was abroad visiting her mum, who's obviously very unwell, still is. Right. So it was timed so that she wouldn't be there. Just before 7 o'clock in the morning, knock at the door, and there they all were. The counter-terrorism director, and anyone that's never been arrested before, like myself, if you wake up one morning and they're there at the front door, your instant reaction, I can tell you, is not fear. Is you just think these guys have got the wrong house. There's no outstanding parking permit. The parking it's just they introduced themselves, said Ian Puddick, we've got a warrant for your arrest. And, I was just absolutely knocked for six, as you would be. They started piling into the house. And then
I mean, had you even
as a
clicked
sergeant.
that this was to do with the whole?
No, no, of course not. No. And as we walked in, Detective Sergeant Ellis said to me, "You've you've been making calls about the affair." And when he said that, I went, "Yeah, of course I have. Yeah, no, that's true. I had, that's true." And that was it. And then when he said that, I knew it was about that. And had I told people about the affair? The answer is yes. Um, um, did it mean that my house should be raided? And when they subsequently raided my home, my office, and my accountants, all laptops removed, digital cameras, mobile phones, PCs, um, the satellite navigation systems from the van. Everything was subsequently removed and sent off to the high-tech crimes laboratory, forensics laboratory, by the way, and that doesn't come cheap. That doesn't come cheap by
I
anyone's
mean, what
standards.
were they even expecting to find?
Well,
Like,
what they were expecting to find. This actually came out recently in my trial. Actually, the sergeant under cross-examination said that they wanted to prove that I had called people and told them that there was the affair. Which, by the way, when I was arrested on that occasion, obviously I've never been arrested before. I've never been in trouble. I declined a lawyer.
right?
If you, I mean, I didn't know. I mean, subsequently, anyone, if you ever get arrested, don't trust the police. Make sure you have a lawyer there. But I didn't know that. I just thought if you tell the truth, and you're
Yeah.
absolutely fine. It doesn't quite work like that, and it's a very naive view of the world. But anyway, I'm arrested. I'm I I gave a full confession in the car. So as they whisked me away to Bishopsgate High Security police station, in the police car, I gave a full confession because I was just thinking, oh my God, what's going on here? This is just huge. Police everywhere. And my next door neighbours all think I'm Al Capone or an international drug baron or whatever. Well, you would, wouldn't you, if you saw a major police operation? You think something's going on there.
Yeah, absolutely.
And being fairly conservatively minded, you would think no smoke without fire. They would not be doing this for nothing.
How were the police, the individual police treating you? I mean, do you think they knew exactly why they were after you, or were they just kind of told this guy is a criminal, let's get on with it?
No, I have to say, I was on that occasion, and it's on the record. On that occasion, they were fantastic. They were really nice. I could lie and go, they're all blah 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 blah. And they weren't. They were very respectful. They were really nice. The officers that whisked me away, I gave them a full confession in the car. Did you ring up and tell people about this? Yeah, absolutely, I did. Why? Well, the chap sent a photograph of himself masturbating. I was deeply upset. What just tell me someone that had found out that there'd been an affair wouldn't be upset. There's, living in the real world, it's no more this guy's fault than it's my wife's. It takes two to tango.
Mm.
There were no threats of violence. There was no anger. There was no I'm going to duff you in or guns at dawn or any of that kind of stuff. I just wanted an opportunity to try and resolve the matter with my wife, with my wife, and try and understand what my life was all in turmoil, and I just didn't want it to work for him while that went on. It's not an unreasonable request. The judge in my recent case, agreed. But get to the police station. Obviously, they take me in for an interview. The interview 20 minutes. The officers say, look, you gave us a full confession in the car. The interview's now being recorded. You've declined a lawyer. Do you just want to repeat what you told us? And I did. It was over and shut. It was over and done with a very short period of time.
And so what happened after that? Were you charged with any kind of crime?
I was charged with non-violent harassment for ringing up the company and telling people that there'd been this affair and that this board member had been fiddling his expenses. The board member was on £1 million insurance company.
Hello, Ian, you're breaking up a little bit there.
Money, one, for their integrity, and two, clearly an issue with this chap's integrity, and there was clearly an issue with his judgment making skills because of fiddling his expenses. The company then launched an inquiry into his expenses. Are you still there, Keelan?
Yeah, I'm still here. It's a little bit choppy, but I can hear you. Yeah.
I can talking. That's why. The company then launched an inquiry, an internal disciplinary inquiry into his expenses. So that was going on in the background.
Right.
The The police then called me in a month later. This is after the big raid. They then took me through for an interview. I wasn't, the interview wasn't recorded. The officers took me through to this room and just said, right, we've got all the forensics back from the high-tech crimes laboratory. This is your opportunity to tell us what other crimes you're involved in. And I said, well, none at all. I've given you a complete confession. You know, there was no solicitor. There was no guarded questions and answers. I just told you the truth, and that was it. And he said, yeah, no, you were very, very frank with us, but this is your opportunity to be a bit more frank and tell us something that you're involved in that's far more sinister. So I don't know what you're talking about.
Is this the whole...
The drugs?
Yeah.
So remember, this is an interview in the police station at Snow Hill Police Station. It's not recorded. There's no... other than me telling you now that this occurred, there's no evidence to suggest this ever happened, because obviously it wasn't recorded. Found a photograph of you taking cocaine. So I said, well, that's complete rubbish. One, because I've never even seen cocaine. So there's no misunderstanding.
Right.
I've never seen it. I've never been in its vicinity. You know, so that's just complete nonsense. So he's standing up, he then leans over me and starts shouting, don't effing lie to us, and he starts getting very abusive. And he said, this is your opportunity to tell us the truth. And I said, I've told you the truth. I've never seen it, so there is no photograph. If there's a photograph of me taking cocaine, it's been photoshopped or doctored. There isn't a photograph on this planet that is genuine. There's no misunderstandings. There's no, oh, here's a picture of you. Oh, by the way, I was standing here, she was standing there. It's all a big misunderstanding. That has never occurred. It could not occur because I've never seen cocaine. So he then loses his rag and he's effing and blinding. Don't you effing lie to me. Do you think I'm some effing kind of so-and-so? This is Detective Sergeant John Ellis, by the way. Up until then, I've been treated really well. Really well. As I said, the officers have been great on the raid. On the day that they took me home, John Ellis was in the back of the car. That's the first time I'd met him. He just kept saying, well, you know, I wish I'd interviewed you. He kept, you know, insinuating that he would have got more out of me. But he was just a complete idiot, basically. There's some other stuff that he did, but I can't bother to go over it. It's all going to come out in the wash soon with this documentary that we're making.
Have you got any idea why he specifically was like that? I guess he was one of their guys, or...
I'll come back to him and talk about his behaviour in a bit more context after I've told you what he did to me, if that makes sense. Because there's a lot more stuff to come out on Detective Sergeant John Ellis. He committed perjury in my trial, but I'll come to that again. I mean, when you hear the whole thing that I've got to say, why would an officer put their job on the line for all this crap? He did. He's prepared to. And he's going to be accountable for that at some point in the future, I can assure you. But go back to the interviewer in there, he's screaming and shouts at me, effing and blinding. I then say, look, I want a solicitor. He denies me a solicitor and says, you don't need one, this is an informal interview. And I went, an informal interview? You just called me an effing so-and-so. That's not informal. So he said, look, we want to get to the bottom of this. I want to know. And then he started firing questions. Are you a recreational user? Are you a dealer? Do you do this? Do you do that? And I just going, I haven't seen cocaine. I've never seen it. Show me the photograph. Show me the photograph. And in the end, he said, look, we don't have it. I said, well, I'll wait. I'll happily wait. Go and get I want to see this picture. And obviously the picture doesn't exist and they don't have the picture and they can't go and get it because there is no picture. But they just tried to threaten and bully me into a confession. I've been told by other very senior officers who have been very helpful. I'm not anti-police, but I'm certainly going to expose the corruption in this situation.
Yeah. And
I'm not going to let them get away with it, because if they can do this to me, they can do this to anyone. And these guys swear an oath before God and Queen, whether you believe in all that or not. You know, it must have some kind of meaning somewhere along the line, and it becomes worthless and meaningless because they are effectively above the law, because they can do what they want. And they have to be held to account. And in my case, and I can only talk about my case and nothing else, I will ensure that happens, I can assure you.
So when did you go on to had you already created the websites? Was that straight away, or?
No. What actually happened was, I've had this major raid on my home, my office, and my accountants. I'm then brutalised in custody by this threatening officer who gives me all this nonsense, swearing and abusing me. I make a complaint to the IPCC. Loads of people said to me, don't bother, it's a complete waste of time. But, if you've never had... You almost have to do it anyway for your own sort of... it was important to me to get this done. So, I wasn't going to let these guys get away with it. Anyone that's listening, the IPCC aren't independent. The actual officers in the police station that know these same officers actually investigate it. Yes, everyone warned me, and yes, everyone was right. They then closed ranks. The officers don't deny ever interviewing me. They all say they can't remember. It's just outrageous. I mean, the officers cannot remember this interview. An important interview where they're going to accuse me of actually being involved in drugs. They've got photographic evidence. It's a fairly important thing to be discussing. Far more important than any of this crap about the affair. Yeah. And they can't remember it. I get an anonymous tip-off by a very, very senior police officer that's been helping me, who's appalled at this because it gives everybody a bad name, gives all their officers a bad name, sadly. He says to me, speak to the IPCC man and ask him to take the door locks, the internal locks within the police station. Police officers have got these credit cards that they swipe, and he said those door locks are independently. The information on them is independently held. The police can't tamper with it. So there's me, a plumber, ringing up this Detective Sergeant Craig Mullish, City of Police, who's a complete idiot, saying to him, as a plumber, can I suggest you check the door locks? And lo and behold, he goes and checks them, and lo and behold, the door, all the things that I said about the police taking me through at this time, obviously they took me through to this interview room. There's obviously a delay while there's an interview. They then have to re-exit, and these door locks verify that. Now the officers have to account for the time. Now they all remember, they all close ranks, and they all give a united story, not the truth, but their own story, which is different. So it's a complete waste of time. So, but it's very, very distressing, very, very frustrating, and very, very distressing.
Well, I mean, if you don't stick up for yourself, nobody else is going to do it, and it'll just carry on, won't it? So, I mean, we applaud you for that, definitely.
Well, that's really kind of you. Thank you. So, anyway, they do all this. We get to my first hearing. Walk into my first hearing. I'm in the dock. The hearing has to be delayed because the CPS have mislaid have mislaid the paperwork. Magistrates have to adjourn it. Before they adjourn it, they look at these reams of bail conditions against me, and the magistrate turns around to the court and says, "Look, can anyone tell me what Mr. Puddick's alleged to have done? Because we've got some serious bail conditions here, and I'm seriously thinking of a custodial sentence. And putting me in custody." And I'm thinking, oh no, my mum and dad didn't even know I was in court. My stomach dropped, and it turned out the magistrate was absolute magic. Policeman stands up in court, and the magistrate absolutely tears him to shreds on all the bail conditions. The magistrate asks the policeman what I've done. The policeman says that I've threatened Mr. So-and-so, this gentleman, his wife, his children, his associates. And he said, that's very, very serious. And the policeman said, yes, it is. This is Detective Constable Briers from the Counter-Terrorism Directorate. So he commits perjury in court and tells everybody that I've been threatening everybody. Magistrate says, well, why is Mr. Puddick not charged with threatening behaviour, and why is he charged with non-violent harassment if all these people have been threatened? So the policeman can't answer that. So he says, I want to know what these threats were. Could you give me more information about these threats? So the policeman said that they were very specific. They were directed at these individuals, and they all felt very threatened by it. And the magistrate sort of very facetiously said, well, I'm feeling very threatened by Mr. Puddick at the moment. Could you tell me the nature of the threats? And the policeman repeats the answer in a different way. He says, well, they're all very specific, and these people were targeted, and they felt very threatened. So the magistrate said, I've asked you twice, and you've avoided the question. I'm going to ask you for a third time, and I want a yes or no answer. Were there threats of violence? Yes or no? And the policeman had to say, he was on his oath, he was in the witness box, he said no. So the magistrate said, what the heck has Mr. Puddick done if all these people are so threatened and they're not even here in court? Nobody's turned up, I'm assuming, because they're all feeling so threatened. And you could hear a snigger in the court. It was very, very funny. He said, what were these threats? What were these threats? And then the policeman, DC Briers, turned around to the magistrate and said, well, Mr. Puddick alleged that his partner had an affair with Mr. So-and-so. I don't mention his name. I never have. I've always avoided that because this is not about this guy. It's about what the police have done in his name. That's why I avoid his name. There's no restrictions. We're allowed to mention his name.
I purposely don't, because I don't want this to be seen as me having a dig at this guy, because my dig is at the police and what they've done in his name, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So the policeman says, I've made these, I'd alleged there'd been this affair. And the magistrate said, an affair? This is all over an affair? And the policeman said, an alleged affair. Mr. So-and-so has vigorously denied it. We've done a thorough investigation and found no evidence of an affair, at which point I raised my hand in court. I didn't know when you're allowed to speak, when you're not allowed to speak. I just thought when you're at school, unless you raise your hand. So I'm standing in the dock with my hand raised high, and I'm a big fella. And the magistrate very kindly, addressed me and said, Mr. Puddick, and I said, could you ask the Detective Constable Briers from the Counter-Terrorism Squad, in their thorough investigation, why they've not interviewed my wife? And they had interviewed my wife, but just by, they hadn't interviewed her in any sort of robust way. It's just that they didn't believe her. And he just shook his head. Anyway, the magistrate removed all of my bail conditions, and I walked out of there with just don't contact Mr. So-and-so, which is normal. And I said, yeah. The magistrate even said to me, is that fine? Has he removed them? He said, Mr. But if I just remove them and just ask you not to contact Mr. So-and-so, is that fine? I said, absolutely. I had no intention of contacting him. And that was it. So anyway, that was the $1 million question. What are the counter-terrorism police involved in all this crap for? Why are they committing perjury in court? Why are they committing illegal interviews? I mean, they're putting their jobs on the line for what? For what? So anyway, this is getting out of hand. I'm starting to put complaints and blog about this police abuse of power. It's getting embarrassing. It's not great for this guy. It's not great for my wife. I mean, I don't particularly care. I haven't done anything wrong. Anyway, this guy then decides that this is just getting a bit out of hand and decides that he doesn't want to press charges. He's no longer a victim. He doesn't feel hurt, doesn't feel upset. The case against me is dropped. I'm a free man. I get a phone call from the police saying it's all over. I am so
not
appalled.
Quite all over yet, is it?
No, I've been so appalled that I've been put through all this nonsense. For what? For what? I put together the website ianpuddick.com. I then publicised it. I mean, let's be frank. If I publicised the website ianpuddick.com all over the internet, who would look at it? Not many people. Because this is aimed at the police, the disproportionate abuse of power, the disproportionate cost of the whole thing. I publicised the website, policeexpenses.co.uk, which if you look at that, it just diverts through to ianpuddick.com. And I then opened a Facebook and Twitter account, and I began publicising my abuse of power case like you wouldn't believe. I was then subsequently rearrested. My home was raided again, and my office was raided once again, or visited once again by Counter-Terrorism Directorate, and I was charged with creating the website. And what they described my website was a hate website against this guy. Obviously, he's not mentioned on it. In the same way that the police would prosecute, say, for example, an anti-Islamic or an anti-Semitic or an anti-gay or an anti-black or an a hate crime as such. They described my website, policeexpenses.co.uk, as a hate website against this guy. Now, you've seen my website. Hopefully, a lot of your listeners and viewers will. If they describe it as that, I'd be amazed. The police struggled in court to be able to prove that it was that. But yeah, that's. I began a huge campaign. The police told me that because it's counter-terrorism, I'm not allowed to talk about it. So what I did was I thought, I respect I've never been in trouble before. I respect the jurisdiction of a court. If a court says, Mr. Puddick, please take that website down, it's inappropriate or whatever, I'm not going to start a row. I respect the jurisdiction of a court. I didn't feel I'd done anything wrong. And let's be really frank, and I don't know how else to say this. I don't want to sound pompous in saying this, so if I do, forgive me. We all inherently know the difference between right and wrong. We might have mistaken beliefs, and we might, if we do something wrong, try and justify it for whatever reason. But inherently, we all know the difference between right and wrong. And I just knew I hadn't done anything wrong. And at this point, I'd done freedom of information requests. I had copies of all the emails from Sussex Police saying this is civil and we don't want to get involved because we don't believe Mr. So-and-so will turn up in court. Well, that turned out to be very prophetic. Sussex didn't get involved because they didn't believe he would turn up in court. City of London spent £1 million, and lo and behold, if they'd followed Sussex's advice, he didn't turn up in court because he dropped the charges. He didn't want to get involved. It was getting too big. Obviously, the police are losing face now because it's becoming very, very embarrassing. So the police rearrest me over my website. This chap comes back onto the scene and says that his website is upsetting him, even though he's not.
That's kind of what really interested me about the whole case, was that it kind of came down to, well, I'm in the alternative media. I write a lot of things that may upset certain individuals, but there's still a basis for saying them. I mean, the idea that you could be arrested because somebody's just upset is kind of ludicrous. That's why I was so interested in it.
Well, what's really interesting, I go up to Speaker's Corner at Hyde Park in London. Obviously, I'm a London boy myself. I go up to Speaker's Corner. Never done, as I said, I've never voted. I've never done anything like this in my life. But I was so shocked and appalled and upset that the police could do this. I've been brought up with British values, sort of true, British values, British justice, the old Bobby, and I didn't realise how corrupt the police were. I just did not believe how corrupt the police were. And they can be. They need to be when they want to be. They're as corrupt as they need to be. I mean, this has all come out recently with News International and the Metropolitan Police. But going back to Hyde Park, I'd go up there every Sunday. I had some professional pop-up banners made up, all about City of London Police, what they've done, their relationship with Kroll. And I would literally stand there and I'd hand out flyers for my trial. So I'm on trial recently. It's freedom of speech. This is what the City of London Police have done. I've complained. They've arrested me for complaining about it. That's in essence what this is all about. The police would send undercover officers up on a Sunday from City of London. Hyde Park is not in the City of London. It's, for anyone that's listening, it's in the Metropolitan Police. It's in central London. It's in the Metropolitan Police's area. So they would send officers up there to listen to me, and I'd get big crowds and I'd be handing out my leaflets, and people generally very sympathetic, as you could only imagine. And occasionally you get someone in the audience going, but the person behind this, it must be, what's the name of the guy behind this? And unfortunately for me, I never ever named him. I can do,
They were trying to sort of set you up. So
absolutely. And I would never do that, because I wasn't going to allow myself to my ego to run away and go, yeah, Mr. So-and-so. I never did that, not once, because this is so not about that individual. It's about what the police are doing. Police have done. So Detective Constable Sarah Mayo from the Counter-Terrorism Directorate, when I was interviewed on one of my interviews, referenced my website, I said, but everything I put in my website is true. And not only is it true, but I can tangibly prove it. So, for example, when I say Sussex Police said it's civil and don't want to get involved, I can prove it with emails from Sussex Police. When Kroll got involved, and they said that their head of security, Dan Mead, is ex-City of London Police, and he's going to call in a favour with his mates, Detective Chief Inspector Chandler and Detective Superintendent Davis. I can prove that because I've got the emails. So everything that I've said is true. But
they kind of tried to stir that so you couldn't really even present it. It was more. They
tried to. I mean, obviously very unsuccessfully. I managed to get Michael Wohlkind QC, who he's one of Britain's best cross-examiners. I believe he's actually been awarded Britain's best cross-examiner at the bar. He's not been in a magistrate's court, I believe, in 15 years. I couldn't really afford him, but without sort of getting him loads of free work, people that can't afford to pay, like myself. He took the case on, one, because it was so interesting, and two, he said, I'm going to win this. We've got to win this. This is a total abuse of power, and he did. He absolutely annihilated the police in court, but I'll come to that in more detail. But going back to Sarah Mayo, Detective Constable Sarah Mayo, City of London Police, she said that if you say print, or this is what she said to me, if you say print or publish anything, even if it's 100% true, if it upsets someone, then a criminal offence has occurred and they have to investigate and have to prosecute.
That is absolutely ridiculous. But
it's just crap. It's just absolutely
I have to write something about Tony Blair and then get arrested for it. It really is silly. But
well, if that's true, our prisons are going to be very, very full. Very, very, very full. And I have to say, I mean, I've been campaigning for freedom of speech in my case, because this is about freedom of speech and abuse of power and the right to say it if it's true. And obviously I've won on all counts. But they tried absolutely everything and anything in court to discredit me. I mean, the headlines, very, very sadly, the headlines in the national press, on day one of the trial, Detective Constable Sarah Mayo stood up in court, and it's obviously a matter of record, and she said that I had obviously put this campaign against Mr. So-and-so with my website. I'd used Twitter and Facebook. I'd sent thousands of tweets and Facebook entries all about this chap to discredit him, to embarrass him, to humiliate him, etc., etc. So she said that to the court. So you can imagine all the press are there, and bang, they've got the headline for the evening, Facebook and Twitter on trial. And, the story was that I'd placed all this information on Twitter. Now, if I put 50 entries about you on Twitter and Facebook, Keelan, they're there. They're there. I can't go eradicate them, let alone thousands. The next day, under cross-examination, Michael Wollkind got Sarah Mayo in the witness box and said, "You've mentioned all of this, all these tweets and Facebook entries." She said yes, and he asked her to produce one. Didn't ask her to produce 500. Didn't ask her to produce 100, not 20, not 10. One entry on Facebook or Twitter naming this gentleman. But she couldn't. They couldn't do it. They couldn't do it. They weren't able to do it. And then she said, "But we believe Ian, Mr. Puddick, does have a Facebook account. It's his intention to do that," which is so different to me putting thousands of entries about him.
That's almost pre-crime, stopping you from...
Yeah. Yes, there's that film, isn't there? There's that film with a Minority Report, is it, with Tom going into the future before the thought police. And that's how desperate they were. Unfortunately, the police, the press only reported that I'd used Facebook and Twitter. I have used Facebook and Twitter, and I still continue to do so to this day, exposing police corruption. But I've never mentioned this guy, not once.
You'd think the press would be more interested, considering if the precedent was set that you couldn't say things if it upset people. Well, the press, that's kind of what they do. Like, you'd think they'd be more interested.
The thing is, they have used it to their advantage, because what they've said is Ian Puddick put thousands of messages on Twitter and Facebook about this chap and got away with it, so therefore you're allowed to do that. So they have used it as a precedent, even though I didn't do that. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
But so Sarah Mayo, I won't go. Well, I'm happy to talk as long as you want. Actually, I mean, they just came out with they threw so much at me, and none of it stuck.
I will say the show officially ends in 5 minutes, but we can go into overdrive, and then the rest of it will be on my YouTube afterwards. So just feel free to carry on. You might hear a countdown to it going off air, but just keep talking. So
I tell you what I did just in terms of campaigning, really. Banners went up with obviously the website Police Expenses. We put them on Colonel Gaddafi's house in London. The irony is I've actually done work for Colonel Gaddafi at his London house, so I'm his official London plumber. I just thought it'd be quite funny, and it would get some press attention by putting a huge 30-foot banner on his house. None of the press picked up on it, unfortunately. I camped outside Parliament on Parliament Square with all the peace activists. You had everyone on there. Anti-war, all sorts of activists on there. I put a big banner on there. I put a tent on there, camped on there. Put a big banner up. Some pictures of it on my Facebook page, Ian Puddick. Showing that I was campaigning against police corruption. Again, the police cited that in court as a campaign against Mr. So-and-so, even though he wasn't about the police. But the bottom line is, I won. The judge, in her summing up, said that I was reasonable. My defence in court by Michael Wollkind was that I acted reasonably at all times, and which the average man on the street look at my behaviour in the circumstances and say that I was reasonable, and the judge had to sum up and say, yes, that was the case. What
was it before you went into court? I think I read this somewhere that your house was broken into and they were trying to tamper with your case and stuff?
Yeah, well, what they did was, prior to my case, we didn't put a defense. When you go to court, you get disclosure, and you're meant to tell the other side what you're going to say in court. You're meant to disclose to them. We did nothing. They had absolutely, we ambushed them in court. They had absolutely no idea what was coming their way whatsoever. And then what happened just prior to that, my house was broken into and all my court defence documents were stolen. We believe that was by a private security company working in the interests of the people behind that. We did actually subpoena we actually subpoenaed the chairman of Guy Carpenter, the reinsurance company, to come to court to confirm that the gentleman was investigated for fiddling his expenses in the first instance, and the company confirmed that in writing rather than send the chairman to court.
Okay, and I don't know whether this turned out to be a red herring because I've not read all of your press releases, but you was also arrested, pulled over, or...
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, Muswell Hill, that's absolutely true. Yeah, they actually cited that in my case. Unconnected with this, but we'll never know the reason why. I was pulled over in Muswell Hill, driving along in my plumbing van. I was in a suit because I'd just come back from a meeting, and the policeman policeman pulled me over, put me in handcuffs, went away. He came back to the car. He's very nice. I said to him that is this to do with my pending court trial? I think it was just a month before I was due to go to court. Told him about it. He was very sympathetic and let me go.
Well, I mean, you've obviously come across a lot of bad people along the way on this journey, but what are some of the groups and organisations and such that have reached out to you or perhaps helped you campaign, or is there anybody?
Well, firstly yourself. In the first instance, none of the mass media would touch my story, which is incredible, because is there a public interest? City of London counter-terrorism squad spending an estimated £1 million on a plumber over virtually nothing. Is there a public interest story? I think so. I think the public have a right to know where their money goes, how it's spent, why it's spent, and who's accountable for making those stupid decisions. So I feel there's certainly a public interest in it. The only way I could get it out there was really by people like yourself. I've obviously I'm on lots of blogs like yourself. There's the people have supported me. They've taken me at face value and they've taken my story, listened to it, thought that there's an abuse of power here, and echoed that out to your sort of listeners and readers on your website.
Well, I think it kind of highlights how the alternative media is starting to pick up the slack from the mainstream, and not just shows and websites like this, but even on an individual basis. I mean, what you've done is, in a way, journalism. You've used the internet and social media to expose something we wouldn't ordinarily know about. So, I mean,
no.
It's a good thing. Citizen journalism taking off through Mr. Ian Puddick.
Well, I'm suing the police at the moment. So there's a queue of QCs looking at the evidence at the moment, and City of London are going to face them in court. That would be hilarious, because if they behave like they did in my court case, they haven't got a hope in hell. So that'd be really funny. Detective Sergeant John Ellis perjured himself in court. More of that to come out later. We're making a documentary. We filmed Michael Wolkind QC for an hour a couple of weeks ago. That's being presented by a very well-known presenter. And what Michael Wolkind has to say about the police's behaviour is very, very revealing. And obviously, as a QC, has massive credibility with the masses. So people will have to stand up and listen to what he's got to say about what the police have done and their behaviour in this instance, and also other instances. But yeah, I'm going to make sure that they don't do this again, and if they do this again, that they are held to account.
Well, hopefully you start a snowball effect where other people who may have experienced these kind of things or go on to experience these kind of things do what you did and expose it, and hopefully we can put a stop to that.
sorry, Keely, I was going to say, the thing is, in this country, we don't do, I mean, I said I include myself in terms of being apathetic. I've never voted. You're almost powerless. You know, when the state exercises its power against you and you feel the might of, for example, in my case, the counter-terrorism director, you feel powerless. And what we generally do is we become apathetic and we perhaps bitch and moan and complain to our friends and maybe go on Facebook and text them, police did this, police that, but we don't do anything about it. And what I did was I stood up and tried to do something. And hopefully that'll inspire others to do so in such adversity.
Well, that pretty much wraps things up tonight, Ian. I want to thank you again for sharing your story. Is there anything else you want to get off your chest? Any other websites or anything you want to finish up on?
Yeah, there's Wikispooks, which is a really interesting website. Wikispooks. Peter there reveals some very interesting information. He's not afraid to hold back, and everything that he puts on that website is verified and true. But also there is this sort of underground movement of people like yourself that most mainstream members of the public, like my mum and dad, for example, wouldn't know that's out there. And you are searching for the truth, and you are trying to do the right thing. And there's lots of people out there with integrity that whether they get it right or wrong, the point is they're trying to do the right thing. And it's why you're searching and trying to do the right thing, which is I think is the important thing.
Well, thanks again for joining us. I'll talk to you again soon.
My pleasure. Cheerio. Bye-bye.
If you found the preceding information valuable, please consider buying a DVD or making a small donation of your choosing. Go to wideshut.co.uk/donate. That's wideshut.co.uk/donate. You are the resistance.